The apology was stuck in his throat, a jagged, unformed thing of glass and regret. Alistair Finch stared at the monitor, at the ghost of a girl in a threadbare blue coat, and felt the words he should have said years ago clawing their way up his esophagus. The screen showed a live feed, one of 37 silent eyes watching over the Finch Foundation's annual Gala of Giving. It was an event he loathed, a necessary performance of philanthropy, where the city's elite paid $5,000 a plate to congratulate each other on their generosity. His own generosity, more accurately. He was watching from the security hub, a sterile, climate-controlled room 2 floors below the shimmering ballroom. The cacophony of the orchestra reduced to a faint, irritating vibration in the floor. He preferred it this way. The numbers on the screen were more honest than the smiles upstairs. Then he saw her, a flicker of movement by the service entrance. A child, no older than 7 or 8, slipping through a door left ajar by a catering assistant. Alistair's thumb hovered over the intercom button to alert security. A street urchin had breached his $1,000,000 fortress. Unacceptable, but he paused. There was a strange deliberation in her movements. She wasn't grabbing discarded canapes or looking for purses. She moved with the solemn purpose of a pilgrim, her eyes fixed on the centerpiece of the grand foyer, a massive acrylic donation box for the St. Jude's Hope Wing, the project he had personally and very publicly vetoed just last week. He watched, mesmerized, as she reached it. She had to stand on her toes. From the pocket of her thin coat, she pulled out a single, crumpled dollar bill. With painstaking care, she smoothed it out against the cold plastic before feeding it into the slot. Then she leaned in close, her small lips moving in a silent whisper to the box, a secret shared with an inanimate object. She pressed her palm flat against the acrylic, a final, tender gesture, before turning and vanishing back into the shadows she came from. The entire event took no more than 45 seconds. A single dollar. A meaningless, insulting drop in a bucket that required 20 million. Yet, Alistair Finch, a man who could move markets with a single phone call, felt the foundations of his world shudder. He rewound the footage. He watched it again. And again. The girl's whispered prayer, the reverent press of her hand. It was an act of such pure, unadulterated faith that it felt like an accusation. An indictment of his entire life, delivered by a child who possessed nothing but a single, wrinkled dollar. He leaned forward, his reflection a pale mask on the screen, and for the first time in 30 years, Alistair Finch had no idea what to do next. His first coherent thought was not one of compassion, but of furious, illogical obsession. The act was an anomaly, a variable he could not account for in the neat, ruthless calculus of his life. He called Marcus, his head of security, a man whose face seemed permanently carved from granite and disapproval. "The girl," Alistair said, his voice a low growl, not bothering with a greeting. "The one who just put a dollar in the St. Jude's box. Find out who she is. I want a name, an address. I want to know what she had for breakfast this morning. I want to know what she whispered to that box." There was a pause on the other end. Marcus was unflappable, a trait Alistair paid him handsomely for. "Sir, with respect, the gala is at capacity. Hundreds of staff. It could have been anyone's child." Alistair's knuckles were white where he gripped his phone. "She wasn't anyone's child, Marcus. She wore a coat that has seen 3 winters too many, and shoes with worn-down heels. She didn't belong. Find her. Use the facial recognition software. Cross-reference it with school district photos, DMV records of parents. Whatever it takes. I want a full dossier on my desk by morning." He hung up before Marcus could object further. For the rest of the night, Alistair was a phantom at his own party. He went upstairs, plastered a smile on his face that felt like a cheap prosthetic, and shook hands. He listened to sycophants praise his business acumen and feigned interest in their vapid conversations about summering in the Hamptons. But his mind was elsewhere, replaying the grainy footage of the girl. The dollar. The whisper. It was a splinter in his brain, and he couldn't dig it out. Why that project? The St. Jude's Hope Wing was a pediatric palliative care unit, a place for children to die with dignity. He had reviewed the proposal himself. The numbers were abysmal. The cost per patient was astronomical. The return on investment, in terms of lives saved, was zero. It was, from a purely logical and financial standpoint, a black hole. He'd issued a public statement, drafted by his PR team, full of carefully chosen words like fiscal responsibility and redirecting funds toward preventative care. It painted him as a pragmatist, not a monster. But he knew how it had played in the press. Billionaire denies dying children comfort. He'd weathered it, as he weathered all storms, with stoic indifference. Now that indifference felt like a lie. The file was on his desk at 7 a.m., as requested. Marcus had delivered. The girl's name was Lily. Lily Ann Dawson. Age 7. Her mother, Sarah Dawson, was a waitress at a diner downtown. Her father, Thomas Dawson, was a former construction worker, currently on long-term disability. The file contained blurry photos of their apartment building in a rundown part of the city, a place with graffiti on the walls and bars on the windows. It listed their debts, their medical bills, their grim financial reality. Thomas Dawson had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. The file included a clipped-on note from Marcus. Her father is a patient at St. Jude's. His prognosis is not good. Alistair stared at the words. Of course, it was that simple, that personal. The girl wasn't a random street urchin. She was a stakeholder. Her single dollar was not a donation. It was a desperate plea. He felt a wave of something hot and unfamiliar wash over him. It wasn't pity. It was closer to shame. He spent the morning in a fog. He yelled at his board of directors over a conference call about a merger, his mind a million miles away. He barked at his personal chef for putting too much salt in his eggs. He felt a profound sense of dislocation, as if he were watching himself from a great distance. This girl, this family, had introduced a chaos into his meticulously ordered universe that he couldn't control. And the only way to restore order, he decided, was to understand the source of the chaos. He needed to see her for himself, not as a name in a file, but as a person. It was an insane impulse, a deviation from a lifetime of detached, calculated action. He told his driver to take the day off. He went into his vast walk-in closet, past the rows of bespoke suits and handmade Italian shoes, and found a pair of simple jeans and a plain gray sweater he hadn't worn in years. He put on a baseball cap and a pair of sunglasses. He looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, a man trying to disappear. He drove himself, a rare and unsettling experience, his billion-dollar sports car feeling alien and obscene as he navigated the cracked and potholed streets of Lily Dawson's neighborhood. He parked a block away from their building and watched. He saw children playing stickball in the street, their laughter echoing off the brick walls. He saw tired-looking men and women trudging home from work. It was a world away from his penthouse apartment with its panoramic city views. After an hour, he saw them. Sarah Dawson, looking exhausted in her waitress uniform, holding Lily's hand. Lily was skipping, her worn blue coat a familiar sight. She was chattering away, pointing at a stray cat, her face animated with a life and light that the security footage hadn't captured. Alistair felt an involuntary tightening in his chest. He watched them disappear into the grim-looking building, and he sat in his car for a long time, the engine silent, The sterile, controlled world he had built for himself, feeling more like a cage than ever before. He didn't know what he was doing here. He couldn't just walk up and hand them a check. That was the old Alistair's move. A transaction. A problem solved with money. But this felt different. This wasn't a business problem. This was something else. Something human. And it terrified him. He started making it a routine. Every day he would drive to that neighborhood, disguised as a nobody. And he would watch. It was a perverse form of self-flagellation. He learned their schedule. Sarah left for the diner at 6 in the morning. A neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, would watch Lily until it was time for school. Lily would walk to school with a group of other children, a small, brave soldier in a concrete jungle. After school, she would go to the public library until her mother picked her up after her shift. It was at the library that he finally got his chance. He saw her through the large plate glass window, sitting at a small table, a stack of picture books beside her. She was tracing the illustrations with her finger, her brow furrowed in concentration. On an impulse he couldn't explain, Alistair got out of his car and walked inside. The library was warm and smelled of old paper and dust. He felt clumsy and out of place. He wandered through the stacks, pretending to look for a book, his heart pounding a nervous rhythm against his ribs. He found a book on architectural history and sat at a table a few feet away from her, hiding behind the pages. He watched her over the top of the book. She was reading a story about a dragon who had lost its fire. She whispered the words to herself, her voice a soft murmur. He saw her mouth the word, scared. He saw her little hand clench into a fist. She wasn't just reading. She was feeling it. An hour passed. He just sat there, watching this little girl live in a world of stories, a world where dragons could lose their fire but might, just might, find it again. Then he saw her pack up her books. Her mother would be coming soon. As she slid off her chair, a crayon rolled off the table and under his. This was it. A chance. He could just let it roll away. He could get up and leave and go back to his empty, orderly life. But he didn't. He bent down, his knees cracking in protest, and picked up the small, waxy red crayon. He held it out to her. "I believe this is yours," he said, his voice sounding rusty and strange to his own ears. Lily looked up at him. She had her father's serious brown eyes. They were wide and curious, not fearful. "Thank you, mister," she said, her voice clear as a bell. She took the crayon from his hand, her small fingers brushing against his. The contact was like a small electric shock. "You're welcome," he managed to say. "That looks like an important color." She nodded gravely. "It is. It's for the dragon's fire. He's going to get it back. I know it." She gave him a small, shy smile, and then turned as the library doors opened and her mother walked in. Sarah Dawson looked even more tired up close. There were dark circles under her eyes, but her face lit up when she saw Lily. "Hey, sweet pea, ready to go?" Lily ran to her, and they walked out together, hand in hand. Alistair sat there, the phantom sensation of her small fingers still tingling on his skin. He looked at the book in his hands, a dusty tome about brutalist architecture. He hadn't read a single word. He had been too busy watching a little girl believe in the return of a dragon's fire. And for some reason, he believed in it too. The next day, he went back. And the day after that. He became a fixture at the library, the strange, quiet man in the corner with the architecture books. He learned to call himself Arthur. Arthur Ashe. It sounded solid, anonymous. He and Lily developed a silent routine. She would come in, give him a small wave, and he would nod back. Sometimes they would talk. Small talk, mostly. About the books she was reading, about the weather. He was careful not to pry, not to ask about her family. He just wanted to be near this small, bright flame of a person. He learned that her favorite animal was a red panda. He learned that she hated peas but loved carrots. He learned that she wanted to be an astronaut when she grew up, so she could visit the stars and find a new one to name after her dad. Each small detail was a revelation, chipping away at the fortress of cynicism he had spent a lifetime building. One afternoon, she was drawing at her table, her tongue sticking out in concentration. He walked over, a book in his hand as a prop. "What are you working on so hard over there?" he asked. She held up her drawing. It was a picture of a man lying in a hospital bed. The man had a big smile on his face. Next to the bed was a window, and outside the window was a building made of bright, cheerful colors with a huge sun shining over it. "It's my dad," she said. "He's in the new hospital, the Hope Wing. It has sunshine rooms and a garden on the roof, and everyone there gets better." Her voice was full of a conviction so pure it was heartbreaking. She was drawing a future that he had personally tried to erase. "That's a beautiful drawing, Lily," he said, his voice thick. "You're a very good artist." She beamed at him. "My mom says I got the art gene from my dad. He used to build things. Big things. He said building something that helps people is the best thing a person can do." Alistair felt like he had been punched in the gut. He, Alistair Finch, built things too. Towers of glass and steel that scraped the sky. Monuments to his own ego. But he couldn't remember the last time he had built something that truly helped someone. That night, he couldn't sleep. He went to his home office, a vast, minimalist space overlooking the glittering city. He pulled up the St. Jude's proposal again. He read it not as a financier, but as a man who had spoken to a little girl who drew pictures of hope. He saw the plans for the rooftop garden, the sunshine rooms, with floor-to-ceiling windows, the art therapy center. It wasn't just a place for children to die. It was a place for them to live, for however long they had left. He saw the budget, the numbers that had so offended his sensibilities, and for the first time, he saw what they represented. Not costs, but care. Not expenses, but compassion. He saw the faces of the doctors, the nurses, the social workers who had poured their hearts into this proposal. He saw the face of Lily, drawing a future she believed in with a red crayon. He closed the file. He knew what he had to do, but he couldn't just write a check. That would be too easy. It would be an abdication of the journey he was on. He had to do it the right way, the human way. He started small. He found out through his research that the Dawson's refrigerator was old and unreliable. He arranged for a new, top-of-the-line model to be delivered, a prize from a fake grocery store contest Sarah had supposedly won. He saw her face through his surveillance feed when it arrived, a mixture of disbelief and tearful gratitude. It was a small thing, but it felt more satisfying than closing a billion-dollar deal. He learned that Lily needed new shoes. He anonymously sent a gift card to a children's shoe store to their mailbox. A few days later, he saw her at the library wearing a pair of brand-new sneakers that lit up when she walked. She was showing them off to the librarian, her face alight with pure joy. Alistair, watching from his corner, felt a smile spread across his own face, a real, unforced smile. It felt like a rusty muscle being used for the first time in years. He was becoming a sort of guardian angel, a secret benefactor. It was a strange, addictive feeling, but it wasn't enough. These were just material things, band-aids on a much deeper wound. The real problem was Thomas Dawson, and the clock was ticking. His visits as Arthur Ashe became the focal point of his days. He would rush through his morning meetings, his mind on what book Lily might be reading that afternoon. He even started reading the children's books himself, so he could talk to her about them. He read about brave knights and clever princesses, about talking animals and magical lands. It was an escape into a world where goodness was simple, and hope was the most powerful force in the universe. One rainy afternoon, Sarah was late picking Lily up. Lily was starting to look anxious, her eyes darting toward the door every few seconds. Alistair's heart went out to her. He knew from his intel that Sarah's car was in the shop, and she was relying on the notoriously unreliable city bus system. "Is everything all right, Lily?" he asked gently. She shook her head, her lower lip trembling. "Mommy's not here yet." "I'm sure she's on her way," he said, trying to sound reassuring. "Sometimes buses can be slow, especially in the rain." Just then, Sarah burst through the doors, her hair plastered to her head, her face pale with panic. "Lily, oh baby, I'm so sorry. The bus broke down, and I had to walk the last 10 blocks. She knelt and hugged Lily tightly. Lily buried her face in her mother's shoulder, her small body shaking with relief. Alistair watched the scene, feeling like an intruder. He saw the fierce, protective love in Sarah's eyes, and the deep, soul-crushing exhaustion. He saw the way she checked her cheap plastic watch, already stressed about being late for her evening shift. He saw the frayed edges of a woman holding her world together with sheer force of will. He had to do something more. That night, he had Marcus purchase a reliable, late-model used car. Nothing flashy, but safe and dependable. He had it registered to a shell corporation he owned. The next day, he went to the library early. When Sarah arrived to pick up Lily, he intercepted them outside. He felt a ridiculous surge of stage fright. This was his first real interaction with Sarah. "Excuse me," he said, trying to pitch his voice to sound like the humble, retired Arthur Ashe. "I hope you don't mind me saying so, but I couldn't help but overhear what happened yesterday with the bus. It reminded me of my own daughter when she was little and how worried I'd get." Sarah looked at him, her expression wary but not unkind. "It was a nightmare. Thank you for keeping an eye on Lily." "It was no trouble at all. She's a wonderful girl." He took a deep breath. "This is going to sound very strange, but I'm moving to Florida to live with my daughter, and I have a car that I can't take with me. It's not much, but it runs well. I was going to donate it, but I'd much rather it go to someone who could really use it. No strings attached. I just want it to have a good home." Sarah stared at him as if he had grown a second head. "A car? You want to give me your car?" "I know it's unorthodox," he said, trying to sound a little embarrassed. "My name is Arthur Ashe. I'm one of the regulars here. You can ask the librarian. I'm harmless, I promise." Her eyes searched his face, looking for the catch. Alistair held his breath. He had billions of dollars, but in that moment, he felt utterly powerless. Her approval meant more than any shareholders. Finally, she gave a small, incredulous laugh. "Mr. Ashe, I don't know what to say. That's the most generous thing anyone has ever done for me." The relief was so profound it almost made him dizzy. He gave her the keys and the signed-over title. He had a brief, panicked thought that she might recognize his real signature, but he had practiced forging Arthur Ashe's shaky, elderly script for an hour the night before. He watched them walk to the car, a sensible blue sedan parked down the street. He saw Lily's face light up as she climbed into the back seat, bouncing on the upholstery. He saw Sarah lean her head against the steering wheel for a long moment, her shoulders shaking. He knew she was crying. He slipped away before they could see him, his own eyes burning. He had just given away a car worth maybe $10,000. It was less than what he spent on wine in a month. Yet it felt like the most significant transaction of his life. He was changing their lives piece by piece, but he was also changing his own. The armor he had worn for so long was cracking, and light was starting to get in. He was starting to feel again. Joy, sadness, fear. It was terrifying, and it was wonderful. His secret life as Arthur Ashe began to bleed into his real life as Alistair Finch. He found himself being softer with his staff. He listened more in meetings. He started a foundation to provide scholarships for underprivileged students, an idea that would have seemed laughable to him just a few months ago. His board of directors thought he was having a nervous breakdown. Maybe he was, or maybe he was finally having a breakthrough. He knew he couldn't keep up the charade forever. The two worlds were on a collision course. The catalyst, as he knew it would be, was Thomas Dawson's health. He got the update from Marcus on a Tuesday morning. Thomas had been admitted to the hospital. A new scan had shown the cancer had spread to his liver. They were talking about hospice. Alistair felt the news like a physical blow. He thought of Lily, of her drawing of the smiling man in the sunny hospital room. He thought of her unwavering faith, and he felt a surge of cold, hard rage. Rage at the disease, rage at the unfairness of it all, and rage at himself for waiting so long. He canceled the rest of his day. He drove to the library, but it was empty. Of course, they would be at the hospital. He knew he shouldn't go. It was reckless. It would risk exposing everything. But he couldn't stay away. He had to see them. He drove to St. Jude's, the very hospital whose proposal he had so coldly dismissed. It was an old building, clean but dated. It had a faint smell of antiseptic and quiet despair. He found the oncology wing and saw them in the waiting room. Sarah was holding a styrofoam cup of coffee, her face a mask of grief. Lily was sitting next to her, not crying, but unnaturally still. She was holding a well-worn copy of The Velveteen Rabbit. Alistair's heart broke for her. He knew that story. A story about becoming real through love, even when you are old and worn and falling apart. He hid behind a pillar, watching them. He saw a doctor come out and speak to Sarah in low, somber tones. He saw Sarah's composure crumble. She buried her face in her hands, her body racked with sobs. Lily didn't move. She just reached out and put her small hand on her mother's arm, a silent, comforting presence. In that moment, Alistair saw it all with a blinding clarity. The numbers, the bottom lines, the mergers and acquisitions. None of it mattered. This was what mattered. This small family, huddled together in a sea of grief. This little girl, armed with nothing but a storybook and a fierce, quiet love. This was real. He couldn't hide anymore. He couldn't be Arthur Ashe, the kindly old man. Arthur Ashe couldn't do what needed to be done. Only Alistair Finch could. He walked away from the waiting room, his mind racing. He had a plan. It was audacious. It was insane. And it had to work. He went back to his office and called an emergency meeting of the Finch Foundation's board. They assembled via video conference within the hour, their faces a mixture of confusion and annoyance. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We are funding the St. Jude's Hope Wing," he announced, his voice ringing with an authority they hadn't heard in months. Effective immediately, the full $20 million. There was a stunned silence. Then the objections started. "Alistair, we've been over this. It's not a sound investment. The press will call it a flip-flop. It makes you look weak. We've already allocated those funds to the museum expansion." Alistair listened to them all, his face impassive. When they were done, he leaned into the camera. "I don't think you understand," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "This is not a discussion. This is a directive. The museum can wait. As for the press, I don't give a damn what they call it. We are going to build this wing, and we are going to fast-track it. I want construction starting next week." He cut the connection before they could argue further. He then made another call, this one to the lead architect of the Hope Wing project, a woman named Dr. Elena Ramirez. He had her number from the original proposal. She answered on the second ring, her voice wary. "Dr. Ramirez, this is Alistair Finch." There was a cold silence on the other end. I know what you must think of me, he said, pressing on. And you're right. I was wrong. I was blind. I want to build your wing, and I want to do it now. I've already authorized the funds. What I need from you is a commitment to get it done faster than anyone thinks is possible. I will give you every resource at my disposal. Money is no object. I want your team working around the clock. He could hear her sharp intake of breath. Mr. Finch, what changed your mind? He thought of Lily, of her dollar, of her whisper. Let's just say I received a new piece of data that altered my projections, he said. A very small, very powerful piece of data. The next few days were a blur of activity. Alistair was a man possessed. He brought the full force of his corporate empire to bear on the project. He called in favors from construction magnates and city officials. He cut through red tape with a ruthless efficiency that had made him a billionaire. He was building something again, not for his ego, but for a little girl he barely knew. He knew the reveal to Sarah and Lily would be the hardest part. How could he explain his deception? How could he bridge the chasm between the kindly Arthur Ashe and the cold-hearted billionaire Alistair Finch? He decided the only way was to be honest. Completely and brutally honest. He went to the hospital again. He found Sarah in the cafeteria, staring into a cup of tea. He walked up to her table. "Sarah," he said. His voice was not Arthur's. It was his own. She looked up and her eyes widened in confusion. "Do I know you?" "My name is Alistair Finch," he said quietly. "And I have a confession to make. I've also been calling myself Arthur Ashe." The color drained from her face. She looked at him with a mixture of shock, betrayal, and dawning horror. You're the man who... You're the one who refused to fund the wing." "Yes," he said, his own voice heavy with shame. "I was. And I am so sorry. More sorry than I can possibly say." He sat down, uninvited. He told her everything. He told her about watching Lily at the gala, about the $1. He told her about his obsession, about creating Arthur Ashe so he could understand. He told her about the library, the car, the new sneakers. He laid his deception bare with no excuses. He expected her to scream at him, to throw her tea in his face. He deserved it. But she just sat there, silent, tears streaming down her cheeks. When he was finished, she finally spoke, her voice a raw whisper. "All this time, you were watching us?" "Yes," he said. "And I saw a strength and a love that I had forgotten existed. Your daughter. She reminded me of what's important. She saved me from myself. So the new wing, the news I heard this morning, that was you?" He nodded. "But it wasn't my money that started it. It was Lily's dollar. That was the first and most important donation. The rest is just details." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small framed object. It was the crumpled dollar bill, now carefully preserved behind glass. "I want this to hang in the entrance of the new wing," he said, "to remind everyone what true generosity looks like." Sarah looked from the framed dollar to his face, her expression unreadable. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the hospital's ventilation system. Alistair felt a lifetime of regret settle on his shoulders. He had done it all wrong. He had meddled and deceived, and now he had broken the trust of this woman, who had already been through so much. He had tried to play God, and he had failed. Then Sarah did something he never expected. She reached across the table and took his hand. Her own was small and calloused from work, but her grip was firm. "My husband is dying, Mr. Finch," she said, her voice shaking but clear. "He won't live to see this new wing. The doctors are sure of it, but other fathers will. Other children will have a place of comfort and peace because of what you're doing. because of what my Lily did. She squeezed his hand. I don't understand you. I don't know if I can forgive your lies, but I can see that you're trying to do the right thing now. And for that, thank you. Alistair felt a wave of emotion so powerful it threatened to overwhelm him. It was grace, unearned and undeserved. He simply nodded, unable to speak. They sat in silence for a while, two strangers bound by a little girl's act of faith. Later that day, he met Lily again. Sarah brought her to the small, sterile family room on the oncology floor. Lily looked at him, her head tilted. "You're not Arthur," she said. It wasn't an accusation, just a statement of fact. "No," he said, kneeling down so he was on her level. "My name is Alistair. Arthur was a disguise. I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you." "Why did you pretend?" she asked, her brown eyes searching his face. He had rehearsed a dozen different answers, but in the end, only the truth would do. "Because I was scared," he said. "I had forgotten how to be a real person. You reminded me." She seemed to consider this for a moment. Then she said, "Are you the one who's building the new hospital? The one with the sunshine rooms?" "Yes," he said. "I am." She broke into a wide, luminous smile. The same smile he had seen in the library. It was like the sun coming out from behind the clouds. "I knew it would happen," she said, her voice full of triumph. "I asked the box to find someone with a good heart to help. I guess it found you." She threw her small arms around his neck and gave him a hug. It was a fierce, trusting embrace. Alistair froze for a second, then slowly, awkwardly, he wrapped his own arms around her. He held this tiny, 7-year-old girl, the girl who had single-handedly dismantled his entire world and then rebuilt it into something better. He buried his face in her hair, which smelled faintly of crayons and shampoo, and he wept. He wept for the years he had wasted, for the man he had been. He wept with gratitude for the man she was helping him become. The construction of the Hope Wing was a miracle of modern engineering and sheer willpower. Alistair was on site every day, wearing a hard hat, his bespoke suits replaced with work boots and jeans. He wasn't just the money behind it. He was the driving force. He consulted with doctors and nurses, with parents and patients. He wanted every detail to be perfect. He wanted it to be worthy of Lily's vision. Thomas Dawson passed away 3 months later, quietly, in the old wing of the hospital. Alistair was there, standing with Sarah and Lily. He held Lily's hand as she said goodbye to her father. He saw her incredible bravery, her quiet strength. He felt their loss as if it were his own. He was no longer an observer. He was part of their family. The Lily Ann Dawson Hope Wing opened 6 months after that, a full year ahead of schedule. It was everything Lily had imagined in her drawing, and more. It was a building made not of concrete and steel, but of light and love. There were no dark corners, no long, intimidating hallways. There were bright murals on the walls, a state-of-the-art playroom, and a rooftop garden where children could feel the sun on their faces. In the center of the gleaming new lobby, mounted on a marble pedestal, was a small, simple frame. Inside was a crumpled, faded dollar bill. Beneath it, a small brass plaque read, "The donation that started it all." Alistair stood at the back of the crowd during the opening ceremony, avoiding the cameras and the reporters. He watched as Lily, in a new blue dress, cut the ribbon with a giant pair of scissors. The applause was deafening. Sarah stood beside her, her face a mixture of pride and sorrow, her hand resting on Lily's shoulder. Later, he found them in the rooftop garden. The city skyline stretched out before them, but they were looking at a small patch of dirt where Lily was carefully planting a flower. "What do you think, Arthur?" she asked, not looking up. She still called him that sometimes. It was their private joke. I think, he said, his voice thick with emotion, that your dad would be very, very proud of you. He is, she said simply. He told me so in my dream last night. He said he's building things up in the stars now. Alistair looked at Sarah, and she gave him a small, sad smile. They had been through so much together. They had forged a bond out of grief and gratitude, lies and truth. He was no longer just a benefactor. He was a friend, an uncle, a permanent fixture in their lives. He had thought that by helping them, he was fixing a problem, but he had been wrong. They hadn't been the ones who were broken. He was. Lily finished planting her flower and stood up, wiping her dirty hands on her dress. She looked at the building, at the garden, at the city beyond. "It's beautiful," she said. "It's full of hope." Alistair looked at her, at this incredible little girl who had taught him everything that mattered. She was right. It was. And for the first time in his life, so was he. He had spent decades accumulating wealth, building an empire of things, but in the end, it was a 7-year-old girl and her single, crumpled dollar that had made him the richest man in the world. He had finally built something that mattered. He had built hope, and it was a foundation that would last forever. His life found a new rhythm, one not dictated by stock market openings or quarterly reports. His mornings were still for business, but now the business was different. He had restructured the entire Finch Foundation. The focus shifted from prestigious, high-profile vanity projects to grassroots initiatives that made a tangible difference. He funded soup kitchens, after-school programs, and legal aid clinics. His old colleagues in the Billionaires Club thought he'd lost his mind, trading the naming rights on a museum wing for a dozen anonymous grants to halfway houses. They saw it as a diminishment of his power, his legacy. Alistair saw it as the first time his legacy might actually be worth something. His afternoons, whenever he could manage it, belonged to Lily. He became her designated homework helper and chauffeur. He would pick her up from school in the sensible blue sedan he had once gifted her mother. He'd traded his fleet of luxury cars for this one. Marcus, his ever-stoic head of security, now found his duties included making sure Alistair's car had enough gas and that there were juice boxes in the back seat. He attended parent-teacher conferences with Sarah, sitting on a comically small chair in a brightly decorated classroom, listening intently as Lily's teacher praised her artistic talent and compassionate nature. He helped her with her science fair projects, meticulously building a model volcano that erupted with baking soda and vinegar, a feat of engineering that gave him more satisfaction than any skyscraper he had ever financed. He taught her how to play chess, and she beat him regularly within 6 months. Her mind was sharp and intuitive, seeing patterns he missed. During one of their games in the park, she cornered his king with a surprising move from her knight. "Checkmate," she said, her expression serious. He looked at the board, genuinely stunned. "How did you do that? I didn't even see it coming." She shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "You always forget about the little guys," she said, tapping her knight. "They can be the most important." The words hit him with the force of a physical blow. He looked at her, this child who was so full of accidental wisdom, and he felt a profound sense of awe. He had spent his life focused on kings and queens, on the big, powerful pieces. She had taught him to see the value in the pawns, the knights, the forgotten players. She had taught him that sometimes the most powerful move is the one you don't see coming, the one that comes from a place of quiet, underestimated strength. Sarah went back to school. With Alistair's encouragement and financial backing, she enrolled in a nursing program. She had spent so many months in a hospital, feeling helpless. Now she wanted to be the one to offer comfort, to provide care. Alistair saw a new light in her eyes, a sense of purpose that had been overshadowed by years of worry and exhaustion. He watched her study late into the night, her textbooks spread across the kitchen table, and he felt an immense sense of pride. He was not just helping her. He was empowering her to build her own future, a future independent of him or any man. His relationship with her was a quiet, steady thing. There was no romance, but there was a deep and abiding love, the love of chosen family. They were two broken people who, along with Lily, had found a way to piece themselves back together into a new and stronger shape. Of course, the world didn't simply forget who Alastair Finch was. The press was fascinated by his transformation. They called it his redemption arc. Magazine articles were written. Talk show hosts speculated about the reason for his dramatic change. He refused all interviews, guarding the story of Lily and her dollar like a precious secret. It wasn't a publicity stunt. It was his life, but his past had a long shadow. One evening, a man approached him as he was leaving a grocery store, carrying a bag of carrots for Lily's lunch. The man was a former business rival, a man named Peterson, whom Alastair had ruthlessly bankrupted a decade earlier. "Finch," Peterson sneered, his face a mask of old resentment. "I see you're playing the saint these days. Don't think for a second it fools anyone. A snake is still a snake, no matter what skin it sheds." Alistair looked at the man. The old him, the ruthless predator, would have eviscerated Peterson with a few cutting words, would have made a mental note to crush whatever pathetic enterprise the man was running now. But he just felt a sense of weariness, a sadness for this man so trapped in the past. "I hope you find some peace, Peterson," he said, and walked away, leaving his old rival sputtering in his wake. He wasn't that man anymore. That man was a ghost, a stranger. The incident, however, dredged up old memories, ghosts of his own. He found himself thinking about his own childhood, a part of his life he had locked away in a vault for decades. He hadn't been born into wealth. His father was a steel worker, a hard, silent man who smelled of metal and sweat. His mother was a frail woman who was always sick, and he had a younger sister, Chloe. Chloe was his Lily. She was a bright, laughing child who saw magic everywhere. When she was 6, she got sick. Leukemia. The doctors at their small-town clinic did what they could, but they were underfunded, under-equipped. He remembered his parents' desperate, whispered conversations about money, about clinical trials they couldn't afford. He remembered the hope draining from their faces day by day. He was 12 when she died, in a sterile, beige room that had no sunshine, no rooftop garden. After her death, his family fell apart. His mother faded into a deep depression, and his father buried himself in work and whiskey. Alastair was left alone with his grief and a burning, white-hot anger. He made a vow to himself then. He would never be helpless again. He would conquer the world that had been so cruel to him. He would build a fortress of wealth so high and so strong that nothing could ever touch him again. And he had succeeded. He had become one of the most powerful men in the world, but he had been living in Chloe's empty, beige room his entire life. Lily hadn't just reminded him of what was important. She had reminded him of Chloe. She had given him a second chance to be the brother he should have been, the protector he couldn't be. He realized why he had so viscerally rejected the Hopewing proposal. It was too close to home. Funding it felt like admitting the futility of it all, like validating the helplessness he had felt as a boy. It was easier to be a pragmatist, a numbers man, than to face the ghost of his sister. He knew he had to tell Sarah and Lily. They deserved the whole truth, the final piece of the puzzle that was Alastair Finch. He took them to the cemetery where his family was buried. It was a simple, quiet place. He stood before the small, weathered headstone that read, "Chloe Finch, beloved daughter and sister." "This is my sister, Chloe," he said, his voice cracking. He told them the whole story, the story he had never told another living soul. He spoke of his anger, his guilt, his vow to conquer the world. Lily listened, her small hand finding its way into his. When he was done, she stepped forward and placed the flower she had been holding, a small yellow daisy, on the grave. "I think she would have liked the hope wing," Lily said softly. "She would have loved it," Alistair said, tears running freely down his face. Sarah put her arm around him, and the three of them stood there for a long time, a strange and beautiful family, comforting each other across the years, bridging the gap between the past and the present, between grief and hope. Life settled into a new kind of normal. Sarah graduated from nursing school at the top of her class and took a job at the Hope Wing, where she was known for her extraordinary compassion and gentle touch. Lily grew, her artistic talent blossoming. Alistair turned one of the empty floors of his corporate headquarters into a free art studio for inner-city kids, with Lily as its unofficial 7-year-old founder. His world, once so sterile and gray, was now filled with the chaotic, vibrant colors of children's paintings. He was happy. It was a simple, profound happiness he had never known was possible. One afternoon, he was watching Lily paint in the studio. She was working on a large canvas, a portrait of a man. The man had kind eyes and a small, almost shy smile. He was standing in front of a building made of light, and a little girl was holding his hand. "Who's that?" Alistair asked. "It's you," she said, without looking up from her work. "It's Mr. Finch, the man who learned to see." He looked at the painting, at the man she saw when she looked at him. It wasn't the ruthless billionaire. It wasn't the broken man hiding behind a disguise. It was someone new, someone whole, someone real. He thought of The Velveteen Rabbit, the book she had been clutching in the hospital waiting room so long ago. He thought of the part where the skin horse explains how you become real. "It doesn't happen all at once," said the skin horse. "You become. It takes a long time. That's why it doesn't happen often to people who break easily, or have sharp edges, or who have to be carefully kept. Generally, by the time you are real, most of your hair has been loved off, and your eyes drop out, and you get loose in the joints and very shabby. But these things don't matter at all, because once you are real, you can't be ugly, except to people who don't understand." Alistair Finch was 55 years old. He was getting loose in the joints, and he felt very shabby indeed. But as he stood there, watching the girl who had saved him paint his portrait, he knew with a certainty that settled deep in his bones that he was finally, truly, becoming real.